Beneath the murky waters of the River Plate lies a mystery. Adolf Hitler's secret weapon, a knife to cut England's lifeline. A hunter that became the hunted. Now, archaeologists race against time to rescue a piece of naval lore from a warship that still guards its secrets with deadly force. This story begins in the old world and ends in the new. South America, the continent discovered by Columbus. Near the shores of Uruguay, more than half a century ago, the curtain came down on a naval tradition almost as ancient as Columbus himself.
Since the 16th century, warfare at sea consisted of great set-piece actions in which gun capital ships lined up against each other and often at point-blank range exchanged broadsides. Shortly before the middle years of the 20th century, all this changed. Battles were no longer fought out eye to eye, but from over the horizon.
At the outbreak of World War II, the neutral country of Uruguay had a ringside seat to one of the last broadside battles in history.
This is the River Plate, and this is where in December 1939, the British cruisers Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles cornered the German battleship Graf Spee. It is a story that involves all the time-tested bromides of men at war. Strategy, weapon craft, and raw courage.
It was the first sea battle of the war, and the world braced for the outcome.
Montevideo Harbor for the battle-scarred Admiral Graf Spee.
When the fight was over, one British cruiser was crippled, and the other two were licking their wounds. But 4 days later, the Graf Spee would mysteriously lie on the bottom of the River Plate. No one has seen her since. The Graf Spee became a piece of Uruguay's history. Now, Uruguay wants a piece of the Graf Spee. To retrieve it, the government has chosen Mensun Bound, a maritime archaeologist with Britain's Oxford University. Others have gone after the Graf Spee. They never came back. After the warship's demise, the British government tried to penetrate the secrecy surrounding her weapons. They sent down one of their best divers. His air hose became tangled in the wreckage. He drowned. Mensun knows the old warship is as dangerous as the day she was born. June 30th, 1934. In the shipbuilding port of Wilhelmshaven, Germany is about to launch the pride of her navy. Strangely, Germany's Führer is nowhere to be seen.
Talk that is hid, Graf Spee, help das Schiff.
Adolf Hitler has other business to tend to. His political rivals are about to face what will be called the Night of the Long Knives. Through both of the day's events, Hitler is preparing to become dictator of Germany and master of Europe. The Graf Spee is one of his weapons. After World War I, when the Allies met in Paris to write the Treaty of Versailles, they vowed Germany would never threaten Europe again, on land or sea. They forbade Germany to build any ship over 10,000 tons, depriving her of the cornerstone of her navy, the ship with the heaviest guns, the battleship. Hitler sidestepped the treaty. He ordered his engineers to use every trick to save weight. They came through. They even did away with thousands of rivets, thanks to a new innovation, welding the hull electrically. Saving hull weight made room for heavier guns. Carrying the biggest guns ever mounted on a ship her size, the Graf Spee was dubbed a pocket battleship. She was faster than anything more powerful, and more powerful than anything faster. In a word, she was unstoppable. In the quest for the Graf Spee, the government of Uruguay lends Mensun Bound a boat, divers, and demolition experts. Unexploded shells still lie within the ship.
Gary?
Mensun also brings in Gary Kozak to map the wreck.
Sergio, good to see you again. Yeah, okay. Everything's here?
Okay, we're behind. Let's get on board.
Kozak is one of the world's foremost specialists in side-scan sonars and the digital imaging of sunken ships.
Make sure they have the handles. I got it. Set it up.
His firm, Klein Associates, made its name by helping to locate the legendary Titanic and a TWA jet that mysteriously exploded in midair off Long Island.
Secure it here just so it won't fall over with any waves, and that'll be good.
Adelante para Leandro Gómez.
Monday, February 24th. The Gomez leaves Montevideo Harbor. Every day, dozens of ships leave Montevideo, carrying cargo to the four corners of the globe. For the world's island nations, seaborne imports are a lifeline. In 1939, Great Britain's lifelines were as slender as a thread. The Graf Spee was one of 3 commerce raiders built to cut that thread. On August 21st, 1939, the Graf Spee slid out of her berth at Wilhelmshaven and into the North Sea. She was about to embark on her first mission. The North Sea was patrolled by British warships, but the Graf Spee was armed with radar, an advantage they lacked. She slipped through undetected and hid in the vast Atlantic, waiting for orders. On September 1st, the waiting ended. Germany attacked Poland. The Second World War had begun. A month later, off Brazil, the Graf Spee claims her first victim. The British steamship Clement. The news alarms the head of the Royal Navy, Winston Churchill. For more than 2 centuries, Great Britain has ruled the waves. Now, with commerce raiders and submarines, Hitler can strangle Britain's supply lines and win the war. The expedition reaches the grave of the Graf Spee, but the water is too rough for sonar scanning. The trip isn't wasted. They can still investigate the wreck in person.
Okay, gentlemen, let's do some talking. I know 3 things about this wreck. I know that it is festooned in fishing nets. I know that the visibility is black down there. I know that we have over 2-knot currents right now. Guys, you gotta go down there with your buddies and you gotta stay with them the whole time. Those nets, if you get stuck in them, let me give you some advice. Don't panic. Okay, gentlemen, this is what we'll do. First pair in, be Zena and Mark. Followed 1 minute later by Hector, Joe, and myself. We'll meet at the bottom of the shot line, and we'll all head forward from there.
Although we can't scan the Graf Spee now, we know her location from her latitude and longitude. But actually finding her is like blind man's bluff. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there she is.
My first touch of her is electrifying.
I can see only a few inches of hull. The rest of the ship disappears into darkness. We come upon a large opening in the hull. The edges are jagged enough to rip an air hose. The light shows a number of canisters. I wonder if these are the live charges we were warned about. Only now do I realize just how murky the water is, and how dangerous. That's when it happens. Old fishing nets, invisible in this murk, are snagged on the wreck, and I become snagged in the nets. Your first instinct is to thrash around. I try to resist it. All I can do is peel away the lines while my pulse races.
Even in death, the old warship is proving she can be dangerous to tangle with. Thursday, February 27th.
Let's go. Okay, guys.
For days, the wind has whipped the sea into a frenzy. Too rough for diving. At last, calm weather. Once more, the team sets out to explore the sunken warship, Graf Spee.
If we lose each other at first, or if we lose the wreck, come up.
While still in the harbor, they run into trouble. The Gomez has hit a snag. The culprit, old cargo nets. The props are free, but one engine is damaged. The Graf Spee will have to wait one more day. They head back, dodging freighters. Half a century ago, ships like these were dodging the Graf Spee. She relied on 3 tricks: a deceptive profile, a French flag, and an airplane.
The Spee would come racing in at a top speed of 28 knots, flying the French tricolour and presenting an aspect of itself that was almost impossible to interpret. At the same time, the plane would be catapulted up into flight. As it approached the vessel, it would signal them to stop engines and not to attempt any radio transmissions. If it didn't comply, the plane would machine gun the bridge.
When the crew was off, the Graf Spee delivered the coup de grace. Once aboard the Graf Spee, merchant crews were well treated. Eventually, they were transferred to her supply ship. Before one freighter was sent to the bottom, its stock of rice and oil was rescued, so the Hindu crew could keep their own diet. In all his encounters with freighters, the Graf Spee's captain never lost a single man, friend or foe. This chivalrous officer was a decorated veteran of World War I named Hans Langsdorff. Langsdorff once hoped to become a priest, but he grew up in the shadow of a man of war. Vice Admiral Maximilian Graf von Spee, hero of Germany's first naval victory in World War I. To an entire generation, von Spee embodied the Prussian military ideal, a warrior with a sense of honor. What Langsdorff would never forget was the nobility of his hero in defeat at the Battle of the Falklands. Von Spee went down with his ship. 2 decades later, the would-be priest became captain of a new warship, the Graf Spee. Tuesday, March 4th. The Coast Guard lends a boat to replace the Gomez. The current is still too rough for a sonar scan, so they decide to take another look at the Graf Spee.
For the first time, I swim the length of the warship, starting at the bow. As far as I go, the ship is remarkably intact. Then I reach the stern, but it's not there. The break is as clean as if cut by a knife. The rest of the ship has just disappeared. Before I can investigate further, developments on the surface intervene.
Bad news. A tanker has run aground off the mouth of the River Plate, spilling millions of gallons of crude oil. The worst ecological disaster in South American history looms 90 miles away. The Uruguayan government summons all its vessels to contain the spill. For the second time in a week, the dive to the Graf Spee will have to wait.
We have to leave. You can't believe it. And he has received the order to come back.
The government has given Mensun 4 weeks to investigate the Graf Spee. Time, not the tide, is now his worst enemy. A month after World War II begins, the Graf Spee is still on the loose. October 5th, she sinks the Newton Beach. 2 days later, the Ashleyan. A few days later, the Huntsman. In late October, the Trevenian. Stalking the Atlantic sea lanes, Langsdorff was bound to find freighters to prey on. And he had an edge. Enigma, Germany's top-secret code machine. Through it came reports from spies on the comings and goings of British freighters. To catch Langsdorff, the British and French set up 9 task forces. 25 warships hunted the Graf Spee. In vain. November 16th. The Graf Spee emerges in the Indian Ocean and sinks the Africa shell of Mozambique. He doubles back into the South Atlantic and 2 weeks later torpedoes the freighter Doric Star. But not before she gets off a distress signal. Just 9 hours later, Langsdorff sights the freighter Tarora and sinks her, but she too radios an SOS. The calls of the 2 freighters reveal their locations and the Graf Spees. The calls are received by the South Atlantic Squadron of Commodore Henry Harwood. After hunting the Graf Spee for 2 months, Harwood at last knows where she is. But where would she go? The shipping lanes off Rio de Janeiro? The trade route from the Falkland Islands? Or the rich pickings of the River Plate? Harwood picks up a pencil and gambles. Off the River Plate, he stations the Exeter, the Achilles, and his own flagship, the Ajax. On the Graf Spee, Langsdorff receives a message over his Enigma machine. A convoy is about to leave Uruguay. Langsdorff changes course for the River Plate. Hunter and hunted are about to rendezvous with fate. Monday, March 10th. At last, the River Plate is calm enough for a sonar scan of the sunken warship Graf Spee. This towfish sends out powerful sonar pulses to the seafloor. The echoes bounce back and in turn are relayed to the shipboard computer. With each pass, a picture of the wreck emerges.
There's something. Look down. Stern. Look at the rupture right there.
The scan confirms what Mensun saw in his dive. The stern is severed, but the rest of the Graf Spee is surprisingly intact.
Absolutely clean. Look at it.
You can compare the model exactly to the sonar imagery. You've got look at the frontal cannon. You can see it here with the 3 guns. You come down here, this main large mass here is this big superstructure.
Amazing.
Very flat.
What is very interesting here is that the ship is lying about 50 degrees to the starboard.
Okay.
And you see that the stern is flat on the bottom, twisted.
That could explain why we got the bow cut off like that, because the mud simply just cuts it over right there. Gary, can we get a better aspect on this later? I mean, this medial rib goes right through it. Really.
The scan also shows why Mensun couldn't find the stern in the muddy water. It lies 15 feet away from the rest of the ship, blown clean off.
Visualize it. This turret didn't explode.
The side scan turns up another find.
This one here failed.
Also, I think that longitudinal thing must have been the catapult for the aircraft.
It is. Launched by the catapult, the spotter plane scouted the ocean for freighters. The plane gave the Graf Spee a big advantage, but it had one drawback. Each time it landed, cold seawater splashed onto the hot cylinders and cracked them. The plane quickly went through all of its spare cylinders. On the eve of its first battle, the Graf Spee had lost its eyes. At that moment, Commodore Harwood's 3 cruisers lay 150 miles off Uruguay.
Shortly after sunrise on December the 13th, the cruisers, in line ahead formation, spotted a smudge of smoke.
The Exeter signaled, "British warship, who are you?" The Graf Spee sent her answer.
With the battle ensigns streaming in the wind, hunters and hunted converged on each other at a mean speed of 40 miles an hour. At 06:20 exactly, the guns thundered to life, and hundreds of pounds of steel-encased high explosive screamed through the air. The Battle of the River Plate had begun.
The British cruisers were no match for the Panzerschiff Graf Spee. It boasted 2 tiers of weapons. At the bow and stern, 6 large 11-inch guns, the biggest in the battle. At midship, 8 rapid-firing 5.9-inch guns. To split the Graf Spee's fire, Exeter attacked from the south, Ajax and Achilles from the northeast. Exeter was first to engage. She was all alone, out of range, and outgunned.
This is one of the 8-inch shells from the Exeter. It weighs over 250 pounds. It's so heavy that I can barely lift it. It's steel-capped for flight and penetration, and originally it would have been charged with over 50 pounds of cordite explosive. The shells from the main artillery of the great Panzerschiff would have been double the size and almost triple the weight.
One broadside from the Graf Spee's 11-inch guns let loose 2 tons of solid steel and high explosives, traveling at 2,000 miles an hour. Each shell was airborne for almost a minute, so the trick was estimating where a moving target would be when the shell landed. The solution was the optical rangefinder. It measured the target's distance, direction, and speed, then fed the data into a mechanical calculator. The calculator figured where the target would be in the next minute, and the guns were fired at that spot. In minutes, the Exeter's communications were knocked out. A gun turret was shattered. Gaping holes opened in her deck and hull, and 66 men lay dead. The Ajax and Achilles rushed in to save the Exeter, while his 11-inch guns kept pounding her. Langsdorff turned his 5.9s on the newcomers. Thursday, March 20th. The side scan picks up a strange shape on the seabed. Mensun wants a closer look.
We are going to send divers first dive on this turret.
Okay, yeah, if we can get a down line on that.
So divers can find it in the murky water. The exact position is pinpointed.
Ammunition alive here.
The dive confirms that it is one of the Graf Spee's 5.9-inch guns. I realized then that if we could lift this gun, Uruguay would have a lasting monument to the most dramatic event in its history. To lift it, we will need assistance from the Naval Command and the Port Authority. We also need to be certain that the gun is not primed for firing. Explosives experts are sent to check it out.
To save the Exeter, the Ajax and Achilles now turn up the pressure. 4 times they fire torpedoes. 4 times the Graf Spee dodges them. Now, Langsdorff trains his guns on the Ajax and Achilles.
One 11-inch shell from the Spee cut down at an angle of 35 degrees through the main deck of the Ajax. There it slammed through 3 cabins before punching its way into the ammunition lobby of X turret, where it killed 4 people and wounded 5 more.
On the Achilles, ammunition was running low. On the Ajax, only 1 turret was still firing. And on the Exeter, 1,000 men expected the shot that would send them to the bottom. What the Graf Spee did next surprised everyone. She broke off the fight. To Harwood, it seemed like a trap. As the Exeter limped toward the Falklands, he cautiously led the Ajax and Achilles after the Graf Spee. Montevideo, capital of Uruguay, December 13th, 1939. Saturday was just getting started. The worst problem facing most people that night was how they'd feel the next morning. No one guessed one of the great dramas of the war was about to be played out right on their doorstep. On December 14th, 1939, the people of Montevideo awoke to a startling sight in their harbor: the German warship Graf Spee. Farther out, 2 British warships faced the double challenge of bottling up a superior foe in the world's largest estuary.
With the Exeter limping for the Falkland Islands, only the Ajax and Achilles were left. But they were each alone, patrolling separate channels of the 120-mile estuary. They'd seen what had happened to the Exeter, and they knew that in any one-to-one confrontation, that both they and their ships would be ripped apart by the vastly superior firepower of the Germans. Both ships were low on fuel and short of ammunition. The men were unslept and on their nerves. The Graf Spee was right here in Montevideo Harbor.
British hopes rested not on warships, but a diplomat. Eugene Millington Drake, Britain's ambassador to Uruguay. He was descended from one of the greatest sailors of all time, Sir Francis Drake. Now, he masterminded a plan worthy of his brilliant ancestor. Under international law, if a freighter left a neutral harbor, a belligerent warship couldn't follow for 24 hours. By releasing a British freighter every 24 hours, Millington Drake could delay the Graf Spee's departure until reinforcements arrived, or he ran out of freighters. But time was his enemy. The Dorsetshire and Neptune were 5 days away. The Ark Royal and Renown were 4 days away. Only the Cumberland might arrive in time. With no more cards to play, the Royal Navy bluffed. The BBC announced the fleet was already approaching the River Plate. They hoped the phony broadcasts would keep the Graf Spee in Montevideo until real help arrived. When the Exeter at last limped into the Falklands, the wounded were looked after by the islanders, including Mensun Bound's family. The British sailors who perished in the Battle of the River Plate are honored in this church. The same church Mensun attended as a schoolboy in Montevideo.
I remember, as a boy, I used to be seated right here. The morning sunlight would come flooding in from the stained glass windows up there, illuminating the names of those who fell. The flags are now more threadbare, and the gilding is beginning to look its age. But the names are still vivid in my memory.
On the morning of December 15th, Langsdorff had his own dead to bury. 37 sailors killed in the same battle. The funeral made news in Montevideo and around the world. As soon as the Graf Spee had dropped anchor, reporters flocked to cover it. The battleship was a big story, and it promised to get bigger. For the first time in history, millions followed a war story as it unfolded, minute by minute.
What will be the fate of the British Navy?
One item in particular caught the attention of Berlin. At the funeral, every German gave the Nazi Heil Hitler, except Langsdorff. He gave the old Imperial Navy salute. It wouldn't be the last time Langsdorff displeased Berlin. Right now, he had bigger problems. British agents had covertly photographed his ship. The mystery of why she suddenly broke off the battle was now solved. Desperate to keep weight down, the Graf Spee's builders had left her armor too thin. During the battle, 18 British shells struck the Graf Spee with devastating effect. They opened holes in her deck and hull, including one 4 feet wide. Several guns were knocked out. Worst of all, the onboard refinery that turned crude oil into fuel was damaged. Without it, Langsdorff could never make the long voyage back to Germany for repairs. Instead, he headed for the nearest port, Montevideo. He needed 2 weeks to make his ship seaworthy and battle-ready. But he was fighting the clock and the British ambassador. Armed with new information, Millington Drake now urged Uruguay to expel the Graf Spee. Uruguay agreed. It ordered the warship to leave port, otherwise Uruguay would seize her. And if seized, she would likely fall into the hands of the British.
Under orders from the Uruguayan government, a neutral nation, to leave port while diplomats conferred, the world wondered. Would the Graf Spee go to sea and fight, or would she surrender? The captain of the Graf Spee, Hans Langsdorff, alone would decide.
On December 17th, with the ultimatum hanging over him, Langsdorff made up his mind. That evening, thousands came down to the River Plate for a showdown. The Graf Spee was about to make a break for it. Beyond the harbor lay the Ajax and Achilles, now reinforced by the Cumberland. The stage was set. The Palazzo Salvo is the tallest building in Montevideo. From its heights, British agents had kept an eye on the Graf Spee. Now, they had the best seat in the house for the last act in the drama.
Watching from this balcony here was Sir Eugene Millington Drake, the man whose diplomatic cunning had drawn the noose upon the beleaguered German battleship. In the fading evening light, the 3 British cruisers could be seen out there upon the horizon. In the harbour, the Graf Spee was preparing for departure.
At 6:15, 750,000 people watched the Graf Spee leave. Around the world, millions more waited for the sound of her guns. They would never hear them. Out of sight of the crowds, 2 Argentine tugs pulled up on Langsdorff's order and removed most of the Graf Spee's crew. 3 miles farther out, the remaining crewmen abandoned the Graf Spee, now stuffed to the gunwales with explosives. At 8:54 p.m., 2 wires on the hands of a clock touched.
The suicide ship, blown up by her own captain, surrenders to the sea. Ablaze from bow to stern, the Admiral Graf Spee is scuttled.
Langsdorff's fateful decision was to save his men. The next day, Langsdorff's crew reached Buenos Aires. For scuttling his ship without a fight, Langsdorff was called a coward by the Argentine press. In fact, he intended to go down with his ship, but his officers begged him not to, for the sake of his men. In Buenos Aires, Langsdorff composed a letter to the German ambassador.
Your Excellency, after a long struggle, I reached the grave decision to scuttle pocket battleship Graf Spee in order to prevent her from falling into enemy hands. I am convinced under the circumstances, no other course was open to me once I had taken my ship into the trap of Montevideo. For with the ammunition remaining, any attempt to fight my way back to open and deep water was bound to fail. For a captain with a sense of honor cannot separate his own fate from that of his ship.
Germany announced Langsdorff had gone down with his ship and fulfilled the expectations of his Führer. Privately, his Führer said he should have sunk the Exeter. Langsdorff's body was never brought home. He still lies buried in Buenos Aires.
From the invasion of Poland to here, it all happened in 110 days. But that was long enough to confirm the Graf Spee as one of the great fighting ships of its time, and to turn its captain into a figure of legend.
The Exeter was patched up and brought home on Churchill's orders. When Britain stood alone against Hitler, the Exeter would stand as a symbol of triumph over impossible odds. Wednesday, March 26th. Mensun's only chance to lift one of the Graf Spee's guns. Captain Alberto Breda, Montevideo's naval commander, is in charge of the boats and equipment, including a 100-ton harbor crane. It's an 8-hour round trip to the Graf Spee. That leaves just 2 hours to get the gun. Captain Breda doesn't want the crane caught in these hazardous channels after dark. It's built for calm harbors, not rough seas. Once, such a crane capsized, killing 3 men. In the quest for the Graf Spee, the hardest part is yet to come. Wednesday, March 26th. Mensun Bound's salvage team anchors above the sunken German warship Graf Spee. Along for the ride is Günther Schröder, one of the last men to see the ship afloat. Then serving on a gun crew, Günther was only 21 years old. The crane that will retrieve the gun can lift 100 tons and requires a crew of 50 men. Divers will link this cable, as thick as a man's arm, to the gun on the seabed. They're ready to lift.
Bueno, José, ahí vamos para la pompa.
The gun won't budge. Mensun has only 30 minutes left, but he has an idea. He proposes harnessing the tugs to the crane platform so they can help pull. It works until the cable slips off the gun. They have time for just one more try. Visibility is down to 3 feet. It takes a precious half hour to reattach the cable. It's 4 o'clock. Their time is up.
We can do it.
Mensun gets one last try.
No, está bien, está lo que pasa es que tenemos que tirar. Ya está.
This is the moment Günther Schröder has waited for. To retrieve a piece of history and a part of his life.
siete.
This relic helped the Graf Spee sink 9 vessels against the instincts of her own captain. For Hans Langsdorff once admitted, "I don't like sending ships to the bottom." The reason this ship lies on the bottom, and not her crew, is a testament to one man's code of conduct. It was Langsdorff himself who left behind the greatest relic that could ever be retrieved from this wreck: a sense of honor.